a minute ago we talked about the control of energy and so on and so forth, but the control of information. If you look in these documents, these guys admit they know about the reality of Chernobyl. Now, publicly, officials will tell you, and IAEA, I think, has a statement that 49, 50 people died in Chernobyl. Well, that's technically accurate in the explosion, initial blast or whatever, people died subsequently. Now, as a result of fallout, some studies show well over a million have died as a result of fallout and cancers and so on and so forth. In these documents, I have a screen capture where a guy is talking about that. He says, well, what about how many people died from Chernobyl? And someone pipes in and says, well, 49. And there's a lot of inaudible parts on this section conveniently, but you can see the thrust of the conversation. They're kicking back and forth that 49 number. They know it's not right. And the guy says, but what about cancer and so on and so forth? And those numbers are in parentheses inaudible where we can't see them, but you can see that the thrust of the conversation is they know a lot more has died from Chernobyl than they will publicly admit. And so that's one of the things you can glean from these documents, just as you can look in the documents and say, hey, publicly they say potassium iodine is not a big deal to have. If there's a meltdown, don't worry about it. It only protects you from radioactive iodine. In these documents, there's nobody going to Japan without their potassium iodine. In one instant, I think it was Chuck Castro, who was the lead member of NRC responding to Fukushima. He forgot his potassium iodine, his Ki, and they said, ship him some immediately. There was 1 million tablets purchased, I think, through Amex and shipped to Japan. So there's distribution of potassium iodine in Japan to military, to civilians. There's a massive amount of potassium being handed out to people. So whilst on the one hand, they say it's not a big deal in these documents, man, I tell you what, they're very deceptive. And they're not honest with the American public at all about nuclear power on all fronts.
And we know that the radiation coming off of Fukushima is real. We know it for a fact quantifiably because of the sailors injured on the USS Reagan. I mean, they went in for a rescue operation and they were hit with plume. They were hit with radioactive snow, which was really steam, essentially radioactive snow that hit the deck of that ship. And many, many, many of those sailors are now suffering from all forms of severe cancers, and many of them are dying.
Well, found in these documents, which was jaw-dropping for me, and this has been a whole nother awakening for me when I read these documents, there's clear indication that the Admiral Willard, Admiral Donald, the Navy reactors, NRC, they knew of repeated plumes. They knew it was a prolonged station blackout. They knew the helicopter water drops are ineffective, and yet they still sailed Navy ships into the plumes, into Japan. They had the Operation Tomodachi, where the Army sent in their chemical crew to do checks as people came into the Misawa Air Base and the Yokota Air Base. I read the documents on those. They're not FOIA documents, but this is what the Army released. In those documents, they state that the guys checking for radiation for vehicles returning into the military base and so on and so forth, their level of protection, protective gear, was based on a need not to alarm civilians. So they wore rubber gloves. And there's a statement, the guy says, he's asking one of these technicians, if the radiation's so bad, why are you wearing just rubber gloves? And the technician says, look, you have civilians on your plane. We do not want to alarm civilians. So this is the callous disregard for the health and the lives of our sailors and our Army personnel to send them in these circumstances and situations when clearly in these documents, they knew they should. You know what I would have done is sailed them around the world if necessary. I just said gas up in Iraq. We got plenty of oil in Afghanistan. Sail them into the winds because we have to react on what a possible worst case could be. They had that information, and yet for some reason they sail them right into the plumes. And I suspect it's just because if they had reacted the way they should have, sailed ships out of the way, tried to make a lead sarcophagi and pour lead into these things, the world would have seen this and known just how bad the situation was and the truth about nuclear power. Their reaction to this catastrophe was based on a need not to alarm the world and show the true reality of nuclear power. That's the darndest thing about it.
Yeah, on that point, we see patterns. And we follow patterns. We see patterns time and time again coming out of governments in general, false flag patterns. We see, for instance, on 9/11, the EPA made the statement that the air was clean and safe for the first responders when they knew full well that the air was filled with arsenic and lead and all sorts of poisons. And all of those 9/11 first responders, so many of them have died, have since died, and have become very, very ill. And so we see these patterns again. It doesn't again and again, and it doesn't surprise me that the USS Ronald Reagan went into the plumes and put these sailors at risk. It's shocking, but yet it's not surprising. And you know, actually, on that topic of patterns, let me ask you something. You have right at the top of your YouTube channel, you have a phrase from one of these documents that you pulled from, and it says, if you have participated in the, quote, Japan earthquake and tsunami drill, end quote, that began today, Friday, March 11th, 2011, please be sure to apply your spent time on this activity to the TAC number listed below. Do you want to flush that out for us, Hatrick, and give us your thoughts on that? And I guess what I'm driving at is a couple of things. I'll show my cards here. There was a seismic event on March 11th off the coast of Japan. If we look at the buildings as the waves are coming in, none of the buildings appear to be damaged. So I just want to ask you about that document that you uncovered that quotes a Japan earthquake and tsunami drill, and then you take it from there. What are your thoughts on anything I've just said?
Okay, there's actually a couple of documents that hint at this earthquake and tsunami drill that was apparently conducted on the same day and at the same time as the actual event went down. Now, this is quite disturbing and should be front and center in all alternative media outlets right now, because in a presentation I do on a YouTube video, I go back to the Vigilant Guardian drill prior to 9/11.
That's right.
I talk about the, it would have been a hurricane drill that Southcom did in South Florida prior to day before the Haiti earthquake. You have the London 7/7 drill with the train bombings. You have an Oklahoma a bombing drill. You have the Aurora drill. You have the Oslo drill, the Texas plant explosion fertilizer. Okay, so we see, as you said, patterns.
Well, and if I may, I want to jump on and piggyback on to 7/7. I wrote it down as you were going over your list. Peter Powers went on the BBC that morning after the 7/7 bombing, and he was the one of the head people at a company that was overseeing and running a drill, as he said.
Today we were running an exercise for a company, bearing in mind I'm now in the private sector, and we sat everybody down in the city, 1,000 people involved in the whole organisation, but the crisis team, and the most peculiar thing was we based our scenario on the simultaneous attacks on the underground and mainline station. So we had to suddenly switch an exercise from fictional to real.
So these drills of which you speak are on the record. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right, and so that's the disturbing thing. Now, we're not coincidence theorists at this point, and in my book I show you the declassified Project SEAL documents from the mid-50s, where New Zealand, United Kingdom, United States were working on the design and fabrication of a tsunami bomb that would create an artificial tsunami and would inundate an opponent's enemy's coastline with salt water. And in the documents, they go on to say this is best tried with a number of atomic charges, because they're doing Bikini Atoll right around the same time or prior to that. So they're saying, look, we'll use atomic charges as well. I also show from the William Cohen interview where he's the Secretary of Defense in 1997, and he says, I'll bring up the quote right here. He talks about eco-terrorism, and he says there are others engaging even in an eco-type of terror that can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. And so with this particular knowledge and the knowledge of this tsunami bomb, you can see that the technology exists if you wanted to. This is entirely possible. And if you look from a statistical probability assessment analysis, we know that the odds, because if you think about having the drill, this was the combined incident response, and they had Japanese utility execs here. Elliot Brenner, head of NRC, Office of Public Affairs, says this is off limits. This topic is off. Don't talk about it to anyone. That they're here and they're using our headquarters during this event. This drill went down in Rockville, Maryland, according to these documents, at the same time. So to get those Japanese people here in the States, arrangements have to be made. You got to fly them in. This combined incident response has to be, I'm thinking many months ahead in preparation and planning. It's not spur of the moment. So the fact it occurred and the same thing happens at the same time, okay, we in this country need to have a very serious discussion about this. And if I could real quick add, I'm in Gainesville, Florida. There's a guy that had a YouTube channel who lived here in Gainesville, Florida. I'm not making this up. The guy's channel, he specialized in the Aurora Batman massacre. He researched that particular drill and that particular event. The guy was not, as I understand, nonviolent and peaceful his whole life. Thomas Brinkley was his YouTube name. He lives here in Gainesville. The other morning, out of the blue, he stabbed someone on the University of Florida College campus. They catch him downtown, and he attacks a police officer with a hatchet or an axe, and they had to shoot him. They shot him down in the street. He's dead. And he was researching that Aurora massacre, and this is in my town. And so should be very disturbing and eye-opening we need authorities to look into this, and we need a serious discussion in this country about what this means.
That is very coincidental. That's very disturbing. I do want
to. There's an article in the Gainesville Sun here. You can look into it. I mean, I'm kind of worried about it myself, to be honest with you. I only want to go so far with Plumegate. I don't do a lot of interviews because if you try to stand out from people, you make yourself a target. I'm hoping people will read the book, engage in the documents, and familiarize themselves with it so they can help me bring this forth to the American public, because I don't want to make a target out of myself at all.
Well, and I want to piggyback on something you were talking about, too, as far as a tsunami bomb. I'm not sure how many people have taken a look at this extremely lengthy PDF document from the Air Force, which was written in 1996, and I'm not sure when it became public, but it's the title of it is Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. We're a long ways, Hattrick, from 1996 as we sit here in 2014. You can bet that the powers that be have the technologies that they've been working on for so very long, and they are using weather as a weapon. And I'm not sure what happened on March 11th. It just needs to be asked what really went down, though, because, again, it's one of those events that's going to change the face of our planet. And I guess I'm not sure what more we can do or say for people at this point. So I'll throw it back to you to kind of summarize. I think you ought to tell people where they can get your book. It's free. You're not asking anybody to pay you for it. That needs to be said. Your work has really been charitable work on behalf of humanity, and I just want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for all the work you put in.
Well, you can find my document in PDF form. It is 450 pages. The last 15 or 20 are colored plume models you can look at, but you can find it. I have a WordPress blog, Hattrick Penry, and also have HattrickPenryUnbound.com as my website, and of course my YouTube channel, Hattrick Penry. And also, as I've said, I have a distilled form of my book in this abstract. If you don't have a lot of time and you don't want to read 450 pages, the basic thrust of what's in these documents, the most concerning points I've tried to include in that abstract. And it's just been trying to get the word out to the public, and I ask people to assist me. As I said, if you make yourself into a MLK type and out in a Gandhi type, you don't last. But if we all do this together at the same time, it's much more difficult to target any one person, and maybe in that way we can bring awareness, and maybe change will result from a heightened state of awareness from the American public.
Well, that's right, and I think that we can leave this glimmer of hope. If we all recall what happened when the American people rose up together in droves and said hell no to more war and hell no to war in Syria, the powers that be were not able to really foment and start that war. And now, of course, there's all this saber rattling with Russia and Ukraine, and as Ron Paul would say, it's none of our damn business, and this country needs to stay out of it. And I just want to say one last thing in regard to this conversation and any conversations any of us have about these very real and potentially very frightening issues. As long as we all still have the Bill of Rights, as long as we have our First Amendment right to free speech, we will continue to speak out. We will continue to try to speak truth and share truth and uncover truth wherever we can do it. And Hattrick Penry, you're one of those guys on the forefront, certainly as it relates to what went on at Fukushima on March 11th, 2011. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
I appreciate the credit, and it was an honor to be on your program, sir.
It was an honor to have you. You guys, thank you so much for listening, and do check us out at sgtreport.com for real news 24/7. Thanks for watching.